Throughout our life, we often deal with seasons of self-doubt, of a lack of self-esteem, of a deep negative thoughts and emotions. And if I'm transparent with you, I've been in that season for a while. I've been in that season since my childhood. And there's dealing with all this negative self-talk. In fact, I wasn't going to share this, but I will anyways. Now, last night was the second night that I had alone with Truett, and so parents in here, you'll completely understand what I'm about to tell you. We went to work, and I was alone with him, and the first time that he woke up, he clearly did not want me. He didn't want me at all. And, he was crying and screaming for about an hour straight. I will never get those noises out of my head. The negative self-talk. Everyone talks about how you don't get sleep, how you don't get much sleep, how you don't, you hear your baby cry all the time, you change all the diapers, but no one tells you about the war that goes on in your mind. No one talks about the war that happens of thinking that you're not a good parent. The war that you're not as good as you thought that you would be. Right? And so dealing with all of this negative self-talk, there are days where I do think, and I've thought before, that I was worthless, that I was broken, that I was hopeless, that I wasn't loved, that I didn't have an identity. For years, I really thought I had humbleness figured out, because how it was described to me was just, thinking less of yourself. And that was humbleness to me. So I would just think about myself poorly when I would get compliments from people. I'd say, well, that wasn't really me. It was just, it was all God. Like, I knew how to make it and turn it to make it sound spiritual, and like I was a good preacher, pastor, or pastor's kid. That was all just God. Logan, I heard this when I was even 16 years old, and I started preaching at different churches. They're like, man, it's crazy that you're preaching like this at 16 years old. And I was like, well, it's just all God. But in my mind, I was horrible. In my mind, I was destroying everything about my sermon. Now, I'm not saying that I still don't do that sometimes, but I thought all I needed to do was think about myself poorly, vocalize it some, but not too much, because I don't want to be a Debbie Downer to people, but vocalize it some, and then dismiss compliments that I would receive. And I would not only feel humble, but I would appear humble to people. That's not the truth. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. And if you're a follower of Christ, then you're going to be in a spiritual war. And in this war, there's battles that you're going to have to face. The war is already won, but there's still battles that we're going to face until Christ comes back. And in these battles, most of them are going to happen in your own mind. They're going to happen inside of your mind. The enemy is going to constantly accuse you of not being a good Christian, not being a good follower of Christ, not being good at what you do right after he convinced you that it was a good idea to fall into temptation. Right after he convinced you that it was good to walk through that door and start being and living in a sinful life. He seeks to consume your thoughts and your mind, because he knows if he controls your mind, then he'll control your body. So don't allow him to take a foothold in your mind. Or as Louis Giglio, I love how he puts it. He says, don't allow the enemy to take a seat at your table. Right? You've had this table prepared in front of you in the face of your enemies so that they can see what God is doing. But while you're sitting there, don't allow the enemy to actually take a seat where God's supposed to sit. And in the book of Hosea, what you'll find is that the Israelite people are allowing the enemy to sit at their table. They're allowing Satan not only to destroy them as individuals, while he's convinced them that worshiping these idols, worshiping these false gods are a good thing, and follows up and accuses them for being bad followers of God, for being bad at following the law of Moses. But these Israelite people, they're allowing him to destroy them as a nation. He's convinced them of this lie that it's a good idea to worship other things outside of God and to go against the law of Moses. And this rebellion breaks the heart of God. And one of his prophets named Hosea, which the book is written by and named after, he gets this front row seat at what it really, truly is experiencing in God's heart. Because how God uses Hosea has him live out the heartbreak of God. In the first 3 chapters of Hosea, it starts with Hosea's life being a physical representation of what God was feeling and experiencing with his own people, the Israelites, with the bride of Christ, as we would call in Christianity today. So when Hosea would prophesy about the rebellion of the people of God, Hosea felt it deeply inside of his heart why this bothered God and why God wanted to change things. It's like when you hear about someone dealing with cancer or some sort of illness, you have compassion on them and you hurt for them and you love them through it. But when you've had cancer before and you've walked through that, you do the same things. You still have compassion, you hurt with them, you walk with them, you love them through it, but it goes much deeper because you've walked through it too. Right? Just a very quick, simple example. When you're hearing about COVID outbreaks at first, and you're hearing that people were losing their taste and their smell and they were feeling horrible before you got COVID, if you ever got COVID, before you got it, you're like, oh man, I hate that, right? Like you're seeing maybe even some of your friends and family die and you're like, man, I hate seeing that happen, and you feel for them, you hurt for them, but then when you get COVID and you start experiencing exactly what they've been experiencing, you felt it a lot deeper. Right? I will never forget the feeling of not being able to smell anything. In fact, Chloe showed me a video a couple days ago, and she had taken a video. It was like 2 years ago, a couple weeks ago, that I had COVID, and that we both had COVID, and we were quarantined and everything. And I was taking spices out of our cabinet and just smelling them. I'm like, I can't smell it. I took like a big whiff of cinnamon, nothing. Took peppers, nothing. I could taste, but I couldn't smell anything. And it was just such an odd experience. But once you've walked through something, it feels much deeper with you. You start to develop more of a passion for it. And God gives Hosea this opportunity to have this passion to prophesy towards Israel so that they could find redemption, so that they could find restoration. In Hosea chapter 1, God tells Hosea to do this unthinkable thing. Right? Hosea is just living his life as a prophet. He's doing great. Right? Everything's probably not going perfect, but it's going great. Like Hosea he's single and ready to mingle. And God says, I've got a woman for you. I've got this woman, and she's promiscuous, and I want you to go and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. So from the beginning, Hosea knew that he was getting into a relationship that was going to be unstable. He knew from the beginning, before he even met Gomer, he knew that she was going to be unfaithful to him. He knew that she was going to be an adulterous wife because God told him this is what's going to happen. And, I know a lot of you are thinking, sign me up, God. I'm ready to just go and involve myself in this deep, intimate relationship with someone who's just going to cheat on me, with someone who's just going to leave me, right? No one's saying, sign me up, God. You're thinking, God, please don't do that to me, right? Especially if you're saying, please don't do that to me. But he says, I want you to marry her. I want you to have kids with her, and she's going to cheat on you. And what Hosea does in chapter 3, it says, so he married Gomer, which I think is an incredible act of faithfulness. The fact that he put his own feelings and his own desires aside, that that he would have had. And he says, I'm going to be faithful to God, so I'm going to marry Gomer. And they had a brand new child, their firstborn son. And since now I have my own son, this story hits a little bit different. But Hosea names this son Jezreel. And he was named after this massacre that happened in Jezreel from the king of Israel at the time. And what his name symbolizes is the destruction of Israel that not only is to come, but the destruction that happened at the massacre. The only real explanation or illustration that I could come up with is like naming your kid Holocaust, right? That symbolizes something. It symbolizes some mass destruction, and this is what his name is, Jezreel. So every time that Hosea would call the name of his firstborn son, it was like, you're destructive to this family. That's all you are. Your identity is destruction. So then they have another kid, and they have a daughter. And Hosea names her Lo Ruhama, which means not loved. So this second daughter, or the second child, their first daughter, every time that Hosea would look and call his daughter to him, he'd say, you're not loved. Come here, you're not loved. You're not loved. And finally, Hosea and Gomer have another boy, their second-born son. And Hosea names him Lo Ami, which means not my people. Now, since most of you have met Truett, my son, imagine that in the hospital room, right? My grandparents, they were there, right? So I'll talk to you for a second. I'm talking to all of you, but I'm talking to them because they were there. Right? Imagine you walk into the room. You already knew what his name was going to be, but imagine you walk into the room and we kept that a secret from you. And you walk in and you're like, what's his name? I'm like, not part of our family. Right? That's what his name is. Not part of our family. Lo Ami. Not part of our family. He's not from me. And every time that Hosea called his second-born son, he said, you're not part of my family. Now, for the parents in the room, imagine you go back to that moment and you have your newborn son or daughter or both in your hand, in your arms, and imagine the heartbreak that God gives you this passion and says, not loved. That's what you name that child. And for every single day, they called those children those names. Destructive, not loved, not part of this family. See, this passion is instilling in Hosea, and Hosea eventually experiences his own spouse who he's built this family and built this life with, leave him for other men, to go back into her slavery, to go back into her old lifestyle. And that, can you imagine, can you maybe even feel the heartbreak of Hosea? He lost his wife, and he's been left with 3 kids who are destructive, not loved, and not part of the family. Now, almost every love story in the world would end with Hosea finding a wife that was loyal and loving to Hosea. And she would take care of the kids and be devoted to Hosea and the family. Hosea and his new wife, we'll call her Jill. If your name's Jill, I'm sorry. Well, we'll call her Jill. Hosea and Jill. They have maybe have another kid, and they love them both. They renamed their names. They said, forget the cheater, or find someone new, someone better. That's what the world operates. But this is not how this love story goes. God tells Hosea that he would redeem his people, that where they were in the same place, I love that, in the same place where they were called not my people, in that same exact place, in that same exact hospital room, they will be called children of the living God. That where Jezreel meant destruction, God will transform his name to be what Jezreel actually means, which means God sows. So God will sew his people back together. Where they were called not my people, in the same place, he will call them children of the living God. Where he called them and told them that you're not loved, he will transform and do something, redeem the people so that they will be loved. And what that means for you is that where God found you in your own sinfulness, in that same room, in that same place that you're in your deepest, darkest moment of sin, he will meet you exactly there. He'll meet you where you are, in that same place of rebellion, and he will transform it into a place of redemption. So that after you're redeemed, you won't look at that place of, this was my greatest failure, but this was God's greatest accomplishment. This was God's greatest work in my life, was taking me from where I was and bringing me to where I am now. So I don't look at that as my biggest failure, but I look at that as God's miracle working through me, where he redeemed me in that same place that you were rebellious. In that same place that you declared with your mouth, I'm not a child of God. In that same place, he will transform and redeem and call you children of the living God. And he does the exact same thing with Gomer. In Hosea chapter 3, verse 1, God comes back to Hosea. We don't know how long it had been, but God comes back to Hosea and he says, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Now, this is where, if we were watching The Notebook, if we were watching some type of romantic movie, everyone would be like, what? No, don't go back. Find someone new, right? They're a lying cheater. Go get someone new. But God says, go back to your wife. And I want you to just kind of have a moment. We think of Hosea as just immediately faithful all the time, but we don't know how much time passed between verses 1 and 2. That Hosea could have had this conversation with God and said, hey, she destroyed our family. She cheated on me. In fact, according to the law of Moses, which we're under, that's punishable by death. Right? Like, I don't want her to die, but why do I need to go back to her? She's unfaithful. She doesn't love me. Why would I want to go back? Why would I want her to come back into my life and have the potential of her destroying our family deeper and deeper still? I don't want to do it, but God said, I know. I know what it's like. But God, do you realize where she's been, where she probably is? If people saw me go to those places, what would they think? What would they think if I walked into those deep and dark, grimy places? Now, I don't know if I can forgive her from what she's done. And God says, I know. I know exactly how you feel. Because as he continues, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and they love the sacred raisin cakes. And I imagine just some silence sets in. Hosea is finally realizing this is what breaks God's heart. It's exactly what's happening to me happens to him every single day with his people, and he still loves them. And then you get to Hosea chapter 3, verse 2. Hosea says, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Could you imagine that moment? Don't look at your spouse. But could you imagine the moment seeing your spouse on a stage being auctioned off to be a slave? You know, for one, just to imagine the dark places that you'd have to walk to get to your spouse, but to have them up there. And for them, like facing the other way, looking and seeing your spouse in the audience. And then you see the battle go up. I'll buy her. He said, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. A lethek is half of a homer, which is like a big bundle. Now, what kind of stuck out to me as I was reading was the price. The price of what it was. 15 shekels of silver. If you don't know this, now you will. But 15 shekels of silver is actually half of what the wage was for buying a slave back. See, a slave cost 30 shekels of silver and some barley. The barley was used to feed the slaves. And so they took currency as in physical money that they could buy things to supply for themselves, but they also took barley as part of the original cost of it so that they could feed their slaves and not have to buy food for their slaves. But 15 shekels of silver When I was first reading through this, I was like, that's probably a generous amount. He's probably like, man, I'll buy her for a lot more than what you're asking. No, he's actually asking for half. Which means that since he bought her for that amount, the slave masters themselves probably looked at her and said, she's not worth the full 30. Go ahead and take her. We don't really want her that much anyways. It's like when you walk into a store and everything is marked at original price, and then you see one thing that's half off, and you're like, why is it half off? Like, it sounds like a great deal, but why is it half off when nothing else is on sale? Right? And it's because this indicates that the slave masters found little to no value in her. So not only did she probably have this war in her mind of feeling devalued because she knew what she did, she was involved in it, but as the world was telling her, you're not valuable. You're just not valuable anymore. You've exceeded all of your value. And for her to see her husband walk up and say, what's the price? Just take her for 15 shekels and some barley. Means that they were telling her, you don't have any value, but Homer says she is highly valued. I will pay the price. Now, very easily we could go into, this is exactly what Jesus does for us. That when God looked at his unfaithful and unobedient people, disobedient, I said unobedient, you get the picture. When he looked at his people that were unfaithful to him, he said, man, I need to redeem them. I need to do something in their life. What do I need to do? What's the price? The wages of sin is death. And so the wages of sin being death means that God had to die in order to redeem his people. And so God sent his one and only son, Jesus, to die and take our place, to pay the price for our sins, to pay the wage for our sins, so that we could be redeemed in the same place that we were sinful. We would be redeemed. But actually what struck me was this barley. You see, barley is a grain that was very plentiful in their region. It was used for food. It was used to make bread. It was used to feed the animals. And barley was actually rationed to slaves, and it was used as payment because of the food. But what makes barley so significant is maybe nothing at all, but what struck me really deep was I think it holds a lot of significance, because barley shows up a lot in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Judges chapter 7, verse 13, you'll see that Gideon was in a dream, and in this dream, a loaf of barley rolled into his dream, and that rolled into this tent of their enemy, and their enemy collapsed because of this barley loaf. And though that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you, what this barley loaf meant for Gideon was it was a sign from God that victory was going to happen, that his people were going to be redeemed, and that God was going to use the judge Gideon to redeem his people and save his people from the Midianites. So barley loaves symbolize victory over the enemy, which means that when Jesus paid the price and bought us out of our slavery of sin through his death, he claimed victory over the enemy. But in John chapter 6, when Jesus is feeding the 5,000, he goes to this young boy. The disciples find this young boy with 2 fish and 5 loaves made from barley. And if you know anything about the story, you know that Jesus feeds these 5,000 people. It just continues to multiply with the food, and everyone gets, but then there's 12 basketfuls of barley bread left over, indicating and symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel all being redeemed and restored into one place. And Jesus wouldn't stop there. He would actually go across the sea into Gentile country, feed 4,000, and have 7 basketfuls to symbolize the 7 continents. Meaning that Jesus used barley loaves to symbolize him saving and redeeming the entire world. See, when God went to our dark, sinful places, he saved us, he bought us with the price. And since Jesus is the bread of life, he used barley. Because Jesus is our life, he used the shekels of silver. God loves us with such a deep passion that he shows up right in the middle of our rebellion. This is how deep the grace of God is in the middle of our adulterous behavior against God, cheating on the living God who is loving, who is kind, who is full of mercy and grace. God has no reason to want to come back to us as we see and as Hosea intimately experienced. But what God does is he says, I love them so much that I'll pay the price. And he met us in the middle of our sin. And he said, how much? How much? He said, the wage of sin is death, so I'll send my son so that my people know that I love them. I love my people. I'll pay the price. So when you feel worthless, repeat in your mind over and over that Jesus says you are valued. When you feel broken, repeat over and over in your mind that Jesus has restored you. When you feel hopeless, repeat over and over in your mind that Jesus is the one who gives you hope. When you feel like you're not loved, know that Jesus deeply loves you. When you feel like you don't have an identity, know and repeat inside your mind, win this war of your mind, saying to yourself, I am called a child of the living God. So you are valued. Live like you are restored. Live like you have hope. Live like you are greatly and deeply loved. And live like a child of the living God.